Welcome to a special video where I talk about an important fixed star called Algol, or better known as the head of Medusa. This is quite an in-depth video, and it is kind of complex. So this is a video that you can come back to several times, and I would advise you to somehow save it, or because it's an important mythological story that we're dealing with collectively and perhaps personally. You should look in your chart if you have anything around 26 degrees and 30 minutes of Taurus. That is where Algol is currently at, but perhaps around your birth it could also be at the beginning of 26 degrees. So anything around 26 degrees of Taurus, or on the opposite side, Scorpio, that you could take until a 2-degree orb, meaning anything between 24 and 28 degrees of Taurus and Scorpio, but also Leo and Aquarius are all affected by the fixed star called Algol. Now, it's fair to probably say right away what it represents. In ancient times, they always looked at fixed stars. So this is quite important, and it goes back, obviously, literally, because it's a historical story, but also in astrological terms, because this is how astrology was read for many, many, many centuries. So right away, it is called the most evil fixed star, invoking violence, beheading, and horribleness. That is kind of clear when you look at the story of Medusa. First of all, astrologically, we call it a fixed star, but that is not the case. Nothing in the universe is fixed. Everything is moving. And it means that it's just slowly moving. So a fixed star moves about 1 degree every 70 years. So as I said, currently, the fixed star Algol is found at the degree of 26 of Taurus and 30 minutes. And this is significant this year, specifically because the planet of Uranus is touching this point July 20th of 2024. But before I explain why this is particularly important for this moment in time, of course I want to take you back to the entire story of Medusa, because we have to find out what it means. And as I said, this is a deep story, and for me, for a long time, I had considered this story, this mythology, that speaks a lot about symbolism and goes very deep in the subconscious. So, these are not just stories. They imply patterns that we need to resolve. And when I looked at the story for a long time, to me it meant a very deep wound about victimization, about victim blaming, cruelty inflicted on victims, and also a very deep wound in the feminine with other women. So being unsupported by your fellow sex. Algol, the fixed star. What is that about? It is in the Perseus constellation. the hero Perseus is holding the decapitated head of Medusa. And that decapitated head of Medusa is what we call the Algol fixed star. Is about violence, beheading, hanging, choking, murder, mobbing, brutality, disastrous, dangerous occurrences, injuries, dark, evil, murder, accidents, demonization. It's foul, it's malefic, and it's about decapitation because, Percy's holding the decapitated head of Medusa. So we're looking here at the end of her story. But to truly understand the full meaning of it, of course, we have to go back to Medusa herself. So Medusa's father is Ceto, the sea monster. This is quite important because we encounter him later on in the story when her decapitated head is used to petrify her own father to help the hero Perseus to save his newfound love. So, oddly enough, Medusa's story is not only about, victimization, lack of support, demonization, sexuality, potential sexual abuse, but also very much about love, because at the end, we find a happily ever after with Perseus and his princess Andromeda. So, before we get there, so her father was Ceto, the sea monster. Okay. She had sisters that were Gorgons, so kind of monsters. But she herself was a very beautiful, fair maiden. So in some stories, she was human for some reason. And, in some stories, also her sisters were not that terrible in the beginning. So they were also not Gorgons. But who knows? These stories are very, there are different versions of everything. So it's very hard to get the full truth. It's very confusing. But what's significant here is that she wasn't the demon and monster that she was made out to be later on, okay? She was just a beautiful woman. And quite for that beauty, she was reprimanded, I suppose. So what happens is Medusa wants to be with Athena, who is, one of those Titans or Titan daughters. In her palace of Athena, Medusa serves that place, and Athena's requirement is that they maintain their virginity and that they are pure. Athena is the goddess of, sort of war and sort of justice in a way. She's very intelligent, very strategic. But so the ladies that sort of work for her, like Medusa and herself, have sworn off men. So one day, because she's so beautiful, Medusa, men are very attracted to her, very intrigued by her beauty. One day, Poseidon, or otherwise known as Neptune, feels very seduced by her. He's very attracted to her. And this is, again, a point where the story might go in two different ways. What I have always heard until quite recently is that Poseidon had his way with her and basically raped her. and raped her specifically in that palace of Athena, in the temple of Athena that was supposed to be about purity and virginhood. Being raped, you're already a victim, right? But Athena did not support her own priestess Medusa, but actually blamed Medusa. So victim blamed her for what happened. She was more angry that there was sex in her precious temple than what had happened to Medusa herself, to the pain she endured when she did not want to. So Athena could only see that she, filthied her pure temple, and was so enraged that she put a spell on Medusa, and her hair turned into snakes, and her gaze turned people into stone, and she was therefore ostracized and had to be isolated, right? Because she would turn everybody into stone, and she suddenly looked horrendous when she started with so much beauty. So this is terrible if that's the story, obviously, right? Because she was a victim. She was blamed for her victimhood. She was blamed for being raped, which takes me back to many conversations, unfortunately, that I had in philosophy classes, believe it or not, in Europe, which people always think as a very progressive place. And the discussion was about, maybe, some girls ask for it, maybe they just wore too short skirts, maybe they were flirting, maybe they didn't say no. And so it takes me back a bit to that kind of talk. And, until Me Too, probably quite recently, that was the case, wasn't it? Often victims are blamed that maybe they just put it on themselves. And, there wasn't that much support for victims. On another story, Medusa is said that she willingly had intercourse with Poseidon or Neptune. And she enjoyed herself. And that is a whole different story. And that would be about, incredible feminine power and embracing feminine sexuality. And, obviously, same results, that she sort of impurified the temple of Athena. And so Athena was furious because, again, right, that was not supposed to happen in her virgin temple. So this is difficult, right? Where if it's the rape thing, that's horrible. If it's female sexuality, which is denied, that's another different form of horrible. I think the key here is that the sexuality thing, raped or consented, both were denied, right? So the story of Medusa continues, and she is living in a cave with her sisters, the other Gorgons. She's turned into this terrible vision, and lives in isolation. Then the story continues with Perseus. He has his own mythological story and is motivated to capture Medusa which nobody has ever been able to do because she turns people into stone. So it's very hard to get close to her without being killed yourself. But he's motivated because, it has to do with his mother that he wants to save. He is the half son of Zeus. So his sort of father, Zeus, helps him, sends him to Athena, the one that denied Medusa's pain and made it even worse by turning into a horrible demon figure. She gives Perseus her shield. She is a war goddess. So the shield is like a mirror and can be used to catch Medusa without actually having to look into her eyes. He can use that shield to indirectly get her. And then his other half-brothers, like Hermes, better known as Mercury, gives him the winged shoes so that he can fly. He goes to the nymphs, or the underworld, where he's given what they call a kibyssus, better known as a sack or a bag, where I suppose he puts Medusa's head in, even though in artwork often, because that does not look good, it is not seen, and we actually see him holding Medusa's decapitated head. So in the story, he puts the head in that magical bag. So these nymphs also help him to receive his other half-brother's helmet that creates invisibility, which he needs to get really close to Medusa. So in his other hand, he has a blade, or a harp, in other words, to, chop off her head. And there are two versions of this. One is said that it's given by his father Zeus, that actually gave it to Hermes, and he lent it to his half-brother Perseus. Or it is actually a blade that is made by Hephaestus, or Vulcan in other words, who is the god of fire and metalworks. So he has all these very special equipments to get her. All in all, in short, obviously he does, because he's the hero of this story. He finds Medusa in a cave that is said to be in Hyperborea, and that means that in a time frame sense, perhaps this story goes back approximately like 50,000 years ago, because that is what they think that Hyperborea age might be. So that's a certain continent and time in history. So he finds her in that cave. He uses all these equipments. He uses that shield to navigate the cave without actually having to look himself straight in the, into her eyes or anything that would kill him potentially. So he finds her asleep. He chops off her head, and yeah, he does it. He slays. He's slaying. He gets the head and continues his journey, but when the blood drops out of Medusa's head, it sparks the birth of two of her sons. One is a Pegasus, white horse with wings, and one is, I think, a giant. It is said that it is the child or children from the intercourse she had with Poseidon, potentially her rapists. But the winged horse definitely indicates purity. So once she's killed, she's of course no longer in her own agony anymore. It frees her from that demonhood, from her isolation. And, you know, obviously Medusa is a huge story of transformation, of metamorphosis, because she changes continuously in the story, right? So the winged white horse is just such a pure purity symbol. And, you know, wings means to me freedom. And horses apparently are also about like feminine power or something. So maybe now she gets her feminine power back. Perseus uses that Pegasus to, you know, fly away and continue his journey. When he's above like the sea, he sees a beautiful fair maiden chained to a rock. He decides to save her, to free her from the chains, and suddenly Medusa's father, that huge sea monster called Ceto, because that beautiful woman on the rock, chained to the rock, was promised as a sacrificial offer by her own parents, that were the king and queens, known as, for instance, Queen Cassiopeia. That's her mom. We're talking about Andromeda. That's the princess chained to the rock that Perseus saves with the decapitated head of Medusa that apparently still petrifies. So it turns the sea monster into stone, which happens to be her own father. So maybe this is, I don't know, something that she also psychologically resolves with her own father or something. Maybe there's also a father wound. Maybe it's related to masculine wound, if it is that she was raped, right? So yeah, that's a little continuation of Medusa herself. So her head is used to free the princess Andromeda, and, you know, that's the love of his life for Perseus, the hero. And eventually, to cut things short, Andromeda and Perseus marry, and they live happily ever after. So they are the inspiration to all those fairy tales that we're very well known with. So there is a great happy ending to the Medusa story as well, because it leads to deep love, which is also significant to understand the meaning. And it's all thanks to Medusa. She starts this whole journey for Perseus. Without decapitating Medusa, she might still be in the agony, in the isolation. You know what I mean? Maybe by cutting her head off, he did her a favor and cut her out of her pain as well. And maybe because he did her a favor, she did him a favor back in death by getting her to his love. So the story starts with a horrendous tale, but then suddenly it turns into a magical love story. And as I said, it shows that Medusa's story is so much about change, transformations. She starts as a beautiful woman, human being. She is potentially raped, turns into a monster by Athena, lives in isolation, is decapitated, gives birth in her death, which is about rebirth, right? So It's about changes, it's about death, it's about rebirth, it is about going very deep into the psyche, into the subconscious. It's about healing, purification, purging, and regeneration, starting over, beginning new, and to purify your experiences eventually. When she's turned into that Gorgon with the head full of snakes, this is interesting because, you know, snakes have many different meanings, and even though I suppose it has turned into the understanding of evil and that it's perhaps about invoking fear and disgust, it is also very much about healing, right? Snake represents renewal. It is shedding its skin, and so it's about continual change, about self-improvement, about brushing off, getting rid of old burdens to embark on new beginnings. And snakes are also often, you know, represented with wisdom, with feminine power, feminine wisdom. And, you know, healing, as I said, the snake is always used in medicine. It's a strong medicinal symbol. And to some, it can present protection. You know, her story could mean that despite tragedy, we may hold hidden powers that we come aware with once we go through the dark and isolation like Medusa has. When we look back to the meaning of Algol, the fixed star that we're talking about specifically, it is that decapitated head, remember? So that's when Perseus has cut off her head and holds it in his hand. Now, Algol is an Arabic word that actually means evil spirit, head of the demon. And in other ways, we can see it as alcohol, because gol or kahal, alcohol, means spirit, right? So this is also interesting that Algol can represent these horrible meanings such as violence and brutality and disasters, but in a very high expression. Algol also stands for high spiritual rays, you know, increasing our awareness and going through a massive transformation that leads to healing and purity. But it is said that one can only receive these high spiritual rays if there is a prior high spiritual development. Now, this is important because Uranus, that is touching Algol July 20th, Uranus is about awakening, you know, understanding your unique self and breaking free from confounding situations, and being, you know, revolutionary, to break through the confines of yourself, but also society. There is a double high spiritual development here with Uranus and Algol, but you know, it does require this awareness already a bit to be able to take that in, to be able to understand the true full meaning of what is going on here, to overcome difficulties and obstacles that Algol can bring. Astrologer Bernadette Brady, that has a very well-known book about fixed stars as Algol is that, writes that, you know, Algol and the Medusa story stands for passion, intensity, ruthlessness. That Algol stands for the embodiment of everything that men feared in the sexual feminine. it's interesting in Bernadette Brady's interpretation because she kind of views Medusa a bit like Lilith, and sometimes, you know, I guess for some it can be seen in that light that perhaps Medusa is Lilith, or that there is a common ground here because it speaks of sexuality, as Lilith, you know, obviously doesn't want to be under the confinement of Adam's authority, even sexually. And here, you know, if it wasn't rape and it was just pure pleasure that Medusa went through, then we could see it in that light as Bernadette Brady sees it. And she says that she, Medusa, is a passionate lover, a whore, a female Kundalini energy, wild, raw. Now that others are frightened by this outraged female enjoyment and this female passion and power, so they label it as evil. Okay, so she says that Algol, Medusa, stands for immense female passion and power. Now that's interesting because it's a different interpretation than what I've usually heard, because if you follow the rape story, you just get a whole different meaning. If it's about empowerment and joy, that, you know, then that's a whole different meaning. So what she sees is the potential power of the feminine and Mother Nature. I also found this interesting interpretation that perhaps maybe Princess Andromeda that he gets with at the end, what if that is Medusa herself? And what if by cutting off Medusa's head, he just stopped the curse that was put upon her by Athena? And once he, you know, stopped the curse, the spell that was put upon her, she turned back into the fair human being, and, you know, got together with her. Maybe, just a thought. But I guess not if you view how awful the experiences of her decapitated head as Algol have been, right? So from that, we do see that there was a lot of suffering, and, you know, because this is astrological statistics that I will get into as well. Why the fixed star Algol was named as being, you know, bringing upon disaster, murder, and all these horrible events. They didn't make that up. That was the influence of Algol being such a maleficent fixed star. So from that, we can say that probably what Medusa went through was pretty heavy and awful, as that was the effect that we have experienced. To understand that more fully, maybe if you're like, what does that have to do with anything? Like, well, it goes back to the old emerald tablets that Hermes has said, as above, so below. So we could say as below, so above, because below was here Medusa's story that went above into the sky as symbols, and affects us back down here below again. So yeah, from there we do know that obviously Medusa has suffered, and quite likely it was therefore rape, or at least intense hurt. Fixed Star Algol has been in the Taurus constellation for us, from our view. You're in the Taurus sign, we should say, for more than 1800 years now. So Algol is very much been infused with that Taurian energy. And it means that it works on the axis of Taurus and Scorpio. And to me, Medusa is such a transformative metamorphosis energy, right? That honestly is in the nature of Pluto. As I said, it's very much about death, rebirth, regeneration, and deep in the psyche, the patterns, the subconscious matters that have to be purged and worked through. It's very much about going in the shadow and healing. So that you understand very much. If you see that, Algol has been in the Taurus sign for more than 1800 years, so working on the Taurus and Scorpio axis makes you understand the Algol energy maybe even better. Therefore, all in all, I would summarize Algol with one very strong word, and that is alchemy. So it's not only transformation, which occurs all throughout her story. At the end, it is about alchemization. So, neutralizing, purifying the energy to heal. That's the end goal. So ultimately, it is about alchemy. And you can understand this even better if you see that astrological axis of Taurus and Scorpio, which is about transforming the physical, i.e. Taurus, and transforming the spirit, i.e. Scorpio, which is about the hidden, spiritual, unseen, deep, under the surface kind of energy that Scorpio is working with. As for Medusa, it is a continual change of identity and of even spirit, of her nature. It's alchemizing the material, earthly life versus the spiritual life, and how that affects one another, and how both have to be purified and healed, so that you transform the physical and so that you transform the spirit. Another part of that Medusa story is that change in womanhood, right? So she starts as a beautiful virgin. She turns into a woman, with sexuality, or at least sexual experiences, good or bad, rape or not rape. And then, at the end of her story, she becomes a mother. So virgin, sexuality, and motherhood. Basically the whole transformational process of the feminine, of the woman, of the mother, of the creator, creational. So that's also very present. As I said, the transformation of identity as well in this story, in this energy. Now, all this change and transformation, literal physical changes in her, and that lead to spiritual changes, can also be viewed from a different perspective. And I found this very interesting, which is talked about by Astro King, which is a Astrology King, I think, a website that talks about fixed stars specifically, where he portrays Medusa being a mutant, which is true because she changes her form throughout this story. First she's a beautiful human, then she suddenly has snakes on her head, and she's like an animalistic form, and then she's just this decapitated head. And this mutant change and transformation, he says that this mutation is about genes and genealogy and DNA as well, that mutation is the driver of genetic evolution, which is true. And that Algol is prominent in history of human genome project, or in other words, the discovery of DNA is linked to aspect patterns with Algol. So this is very interesting, knowing what Pluto stands for, which is the opposite side of Algol, which is Scorpio, right? So Pluto rules nuclear, the nucleus, the core of the cell, the minuscule, the little parts of beingness, and you know, the atoms, the nuclear, and you know, Pluto and Scorpio being all about mutation and transformation, means that Algol has this strongly, as I said, she has this nature of a very Plutonic nature to her. So this is interesting to keep in mind, because I'm gonna now throw some statistics at you to understand what Algol has brought to us throughout history. Because, you know, often, unfortunately, history repeats because people are not aware enough to transmute and heal energies, because what you don't heal repeats. So this mutation aspect in the DNA comes back in historical facts. So before that, we look in what it brings us this year, quite possibly. We have to look back to be able to get an idea of what is to come. So Uranus has made a conjunction with Algol every 84 years or so, because that's how much Uranus takes around the zodiac cycle. And it means 84 years, that's quite some time. And when we look back to one of the most earlier times that this occurs is around the French Revolution in 1790, when there was also a solar eclipse at Algol. And so here you see the chaos and the destruction that, you know, this energy can bring. It was also the time of a very big famine in India, as Taurus is about food as well. So keep in mind that about food and animals is something that is very linked to Algol's potential disastrous outcomes, okay? Then when we look closer in time to us, we find another moment in time that you know, Uranus is near Algol, and that is 1856. And this is very interesting because they find the first remains of a Neanderthal in Germany, and so they find the DNA of a Neanderthal, and they find that gene, right, that different gene complex. And as I said, remember that Algol and Medusa are very much about mutation and DNA and genes, okay? So interesting because of the current chart. It was also the time of the Second Opium War, because it was Algol was trining, or Uranus was trining, no, sorry, it was sextiling Neptune, think also in Pisces back then. So, you know, that's about addictions, drugs, intoxication, escapism. So Second Opium War in 1856 might give us an idea about what could happen this year as well. And that was obviously in China or the Far East. Just saying. In 1856, something significant happened as well. Both Freud, the father of modern psychology, was born, and Nikola Tesla, one of the biggest, most important inventors of recent times, was born as well. And this is very Uranian. And, you know, again, remember that Algol in Taurus. On the opposite side, we have Scorpio. So that also means psychology, the psyche, and that was Freud. And Tesla was that Uranus Taurus energy where, you know, he discovered the physical and playing with the physical through vibrations. So yeah, then things are heating up and we find ourselves in the times of the Second World War, so the beginning of 1940s. There's a 2-year time that Algol is visited by Uranus, or in other words, Uranus is transiting Algol. So June, July of 1940 is the first time that Uranus hits Algol. And that time is known as the Nazi Blitzkrieg. And the Blitzkrieg means something that we had never seen before in recent history, for as much as we know. And that was a huge technological advancement. There was maybe in the First World War, but there were no use of planes dropping bombs before in history. So, and not only were they dropping bombs out of airplanes, they were so fast, and that's the Blitzkrieg, because of their airfare, their technology, massive advancements. They could also invoke massive destruction and violence and brutality that Algol can bring, right? So that's a very good example of Uranus and Algol together. And that gives you a bit of an indication, okay? So weapons of mass destruction. And in May 6th, 1941, Stalin is chosen as the premier of the Soviet Union. So, you know, that's obviously a horrific moment in history. And Stalin is known to, well, have caused a lot of killings in his time, okay? So January 1942 is the last Uranus Algol connection in recent history, and there we find ourselves at another huge moment in time of quite a large-scale brutality, and it is begun in 1942 with the 1Z Final Solution Conference, and they decide on building the first extermination camps where the former concentration camps now were turned into factories of death. And these are words by Diana Rosenberg, who writes about these Algol and Uranus statistical occurrences in history, when she talks about Medusa's head. It's a very good article, so the information is from her. And also interesting because of the charts, we also have Mars very close by, very close by when we have Uranus meeting Algol. So this is important because on July 16th, 1945, when Mars was at Algol, we had the first nuclear bomb testing explosion in Nevada, and shortly thereafter, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed with first nuclear weapons, as far as we know. So, as I said, weapons of mass destruction are also unfortunately involved when we talk about Uranus and Algol, and specifically also when Mars, the planet of explosions and fire and heat, is also involved. Interesting, when we look at astroking.com, you see Uranus conjunct Algol with the birth of John Lennon, Nikola Tesla, Muhammad Ali, Bob Dylan, and Bruce Lee. And this is interesting because these are all people who are very different, and they brought very unique versions of themselves and broke fixed patterns in society. So that's also very much the energy of Uranus and Algol together. This is massive changes. So, you know, sometimes you have to break down to get a breakthrough, and that's kind of the energy. So if you're not aware of yourself, if you're not aware of things going on, if you're not aware of history and astrology, then, you know, I think Algol works quite negatively to get, you know, the attention. But the more you're aware and the more you're willing to heal and transform yourself to be the best example first, the more you can benefit and turn this around for empowerment and authenticity and yeah, really standing in your uniqueness that is so strong, so powerful. It's like, don't use atomic bombs, be an atomic bomb or something like that. I think with increased awareness, you can also see that there is a huge alchemization in her story as well, of her pain and the recognition of her pain and the recognition of her own hero-ness leads to the aid, you know, leads to her helping Perseus in overcoming his journey to love. So eventually her deep pain turns into deep love, where, you know, she's part of that loving story. So, and you know, Taurus is ruled by Venus, so it is very much about what we love and what we find pleasurable and joyful and feeling good, you know. So that is also definitely the topic here. I also found a very interesting article by Moonfall Metaphysical explaining how, and I totally agree, that Medusa is about feminine power and the human psyche, as I said, represented in also the opposite side of Taurus being Scorpio. And that her petrification, so her gaze turning people into stone, is really a fear of facing the deepest fears and desires within. Absolutely. So it's about facing your fears and your true deepest wants in life. At the petrification, the turning people into stone, her gaze is also about a paralysis that comes from inaction. Very interesting. You know, a deep reflection has to occur within yourself to see where you've come from and where you want to head to, and what is so important and essential in your life. What are you ready to overcome, transmute, and metamorphosize into love, and be the vehicle for love. That is a very high expression of Medusa, and I would say a very new energy linked to Algol, and it has to do with a very increased vibration all over Mother Earth. And you know, so if you are, as it said, you know, more spiritually aware, being able to receive these higher spiritual waves and a radiation from Algol, you can really turn and see the other side of this alchemization, that it's really about love, and that the path is about love. And that is true healing. And she says that also it's about embracing and integrating your shadow. Absolutely. Because if you don't do the psychological work, and if you don't do the ancestral work, which goes back to the gene mutation aspect of Medusa, then what happens is that everything always follows you, you know, and that either you live in a cave in isolation, or it just haunts you, you know, until you lose your head, or you transmute this pain into power. And so it's about really personal growth and self-actualization. Thank you, Moonful Metaphysical, for this insight. So let's see where the history of this pain, this trauma, has led to catastrophical occurrences such as mass violence, mass death of people, of places, of, you know, such as the Second World War, you know, but also maybe, you know, good things like the discovery of the DNA, and like a massive technological new age, that we have to be careful that it doesn't go into the violent catastrophe that Algol can bring. So when we look at the chart, we see that on July 20th, 2024, it occurs at 13:03, so midday GMT. And July 20th of 2024 is particularly interesting because the next day, July 21st, we are experiencing once in a blue moon, meaning it is our second full moon in the sign of Capricorn, occurring at 29 degrees, which is the very end of the Capricorn sign. This is very relevant because Pluto has been in Capricorn since 2008 and is finishing his transit in the autumn or fall season. So we're not just having a very rare blue moon, but we're also massively completing a Pluto cycle that happens like once almost every 300 years in the sign of Capricorn. So it's this energy is closing out major storylines here. So this is important to have in the back of your mind, because this conjunction occurs one day before this massive lunation. And it means that we are already in full moon energy on July 20th. So the moon is at 16 degrees of Capricorn when this conjunction with Uranus happens. And it means that it is conjunct with the fixed star Vega. And that is, again, DNA. It's the origins. It is, it's about human beings and how human beings were made and how they were mutated, how DNA was worked with. And the constellation of Lyra that Vega's in is very much about music and sound, as I have said before. So hopefully that will help us, because sound and music are eventually actually frequency and vibration, which ties back into the Uranus element. So just saying that the moon is here, and that is a huge effect for this conjunction. So July 20th, 2024, once in an 84-year thing occurs. Uranus is on Algol at 26 degrees and 30 minutes of the sign of Taurus. Right there we have Mars at 29 degrees and 45 minutes of Taurus. So Mars is at the very end, aneretic degree, and this is a crisis degree, and Mars is, as I said, potentially about explosions, heat, flames, fire, sharp objects, obviously war, you know, he's the god of war. This is about fighting, so that is not very good, I'd say. And let me remind you that 84 years ago, Mars being around here was the start of the use of atomic bombs. Yikey, crikey. Oh, by the way, remember that atomic bombs cause huge problems and mutations to the DNA. And yeah, so Algol being about mutation, it could also be like huge experiments around DNA. This could be like Neuralink kind of instances. Maybe officially the first chip is put into the brain of a human being or something like that. Remember, this is where Nikola Tesla was born. You know, this is the atomic bomb. So there's a lot of like technological invention stuff going here. Yeah, very futuristic, huge discoveries or occurrences that literally or figuratively might blow up the system as we have known it. And there are quite some aspects that this situation is making. And first of all, there's that sextile to Neptune, also at 29 degrees of Pisces, which is the very end of the zodiac. That's a whole issue in itself. But Neptune here is retrograde, which to me is popping the illusions, is seeing the spiritual, is seeing the energetic truth. It's bringing more clarity. But remember that I also said that in history, this sextile between Uranus at Algol sextiling with Neptune in Pisces was the Opium War. So this could be a recurrence of that. This could be like either drug wars or like, this is actually also about health. So Neptune is about viruses and unseen issues and bacteria and toxins, toxicity. So or maybe issues in the water that is also heightened here, or like bombs dropping off in the water. Okay, unfortunately that I can almost see that. Okay, nuclear bombs being dropped in the water or something like that. Or hypersonic because of that Uranus, and we are 84 years ahead in time, so we are more technologically advanced in a way, right? So there are even worse weapons that we might not be very aware of. So yeah, there's that. Ultimately, if it's positive, it should bring us more spiritual insight, more spiritual awareness, more spiritual practices. Like, you know, this is a moment where you should almost feel the divine, but unfortunately collectively it can showcase as a whole lot of trouble. Okay, and there's a trine to Pluto, which is also destructiveness, which is also about technology, which is about masses of people. So obviously anything that's occurring around July 20th and, you know, maybe possibly this entire coming year as well, as this, you know, Uranus is slow. And as I said, Uranus going over Algol in 1940s was a 2-year transit. So, you know, we're in this energy for a while. And, you know, I think we're embarking on some dangerous times, to be very honest. This Uranus Algol and Mars conjunction is also sextiling the sun in the sign of Crab, which is about home, safety, security, homeland security, security issues, right? So ultimately it is about higher intuition and building a home, building comfort, building that feel-good, comfortable place, your sanctuary. This is about love and warmth and oxytocin, but you know, it's really, we'll have to see how it plays out, because at the end of the day, the sun is opposite Pluto. So this is you know, a hurdle we have to face. And are we gonna move into more love, or are we gonna move into way colder society and you know, deny this deep need we have for affection and kindness? So Uranus and Algol are also squaring our planet Mercury, who's at 25 degrees of Leo. And Mercury is actually in a pre-shadow period, which means Mercury is going to go retrograde over this in the summer, and we're already in the pre-shadow, so we're already in a moment with that Mercury is slowing down and getting more reflective slowly, not yet, but so that's significant as well, that the Mercury retrograde is going to go over this point soon after. That retrograde starts August 5th actually. But so here we have a strong square in the chart. You know, this is difficult because a square always is difficult. This is about frustration and discomfort and agitation, and like, you know, Mercury is our lower mind and Uranus is our higher mind. So this is about intelligence. This is about information. This is about learning. This is about communication, and you know, the energy is off. So it makes me think, like, is this bad news? Is this big bad news? Is this dramatic bad news? This is also a bit lost in translation, where somebody says something else, you don't get it, and like people are out of touch with each other. It's hard to be clear or like get your mind around something. Maybe there's a bit of confusement as well, like what's going on. It's an Aries degree, which takes me back to like warlike, fiery elements. Uranus and Algol are very like explosive energies. It's about, you know, potential earthquakes or fires, explosions, riots, extreme sickness, or like, you know, mines caving in and that sort of stuff. So this takes me to the fire thing, so maybe big fires, unfortunately, and definitely also earthquake issues, and because of Neptune playing around here as well, and because Algol is also this, it can bring extreme sickness for some reason. So it's a bit bad news, honestly, like bad information that's coming out. You know, our mind wants to be about joy and fun and excitement and summer, but reality is gonna take us somewhere else. And we might just feel very dramatic, like have dramatic thoughts and want to be very expressive about what happens. Maybe that's it too, that we quite want to vocalize what's going on, like express ourselves strongly. And it's also about stepping into your power. That's the difficulty here. You know, are you able to not mind being in focus, like not mind that the spotlight is on you when you speak out? This is super interesting. This Mercury is conjunct Medusa, the asteroid. And so Medusa, the asteroid, is squaring her decapitated head in Algol and Uranus. So this makes me think also there's like literal information coming out about Medusa, or we're finally trying to understand the other side of this story, different interpretations, as I hopefully have gave you in this video, and that we have to readjust this whole reality, and that there's something about either, as I said, DNA mutation, or like the big powerful need for transformation, for change. Medusa is at a Capricorn degree, so that takes me to the full moon the next day, that we're closing out a major cycle. Capricorn is also about history and about systems, and what I should definitely mention is that Capricorn is about the patriarchal system. So about authority and like who's in charge, and unfortunately it has been men for a very long time. And we can see that in Medusa's story as well, right? So, you know, her power is taken away by the rape, but also about Athena takes it away too, and she's about war, which is a very masculine energy, even though she's a woman. Maybe, I think it's just, the part of it is just an ending to a certain system and the way things were, and who's in authority, and are you in your own authority? And can you now take on the spotlight? Can you now take on the attention? And can you now integrate this energy? Can you transform it? Can you help to free Medusa? Can you help all of us collectively to be freed from this trauma, from this victim blaming, the wound of betrayal? So are you able to confront your own pain? Are you able to vocalize your own journey and your own pain? Are you able to express it and maybe find creative outlets to release a lot of the pain? And can you now change even your ancestral trauma patterns? Can you give them a voice? Can you see that Medusa is part of your heritage? And how you can free that DNA line, that ancestral line. So opposite Algol and Uranus, we also find Lilith. And as I said, Bernadette Brady, interestingly, puts Medusa together with Lilith, about how this is like feminine sexual power. So she's here, she's involved. So maybe there's a thing that Bernadette Brady was on, like Lilith is involved here for some reason. You know, because they were both rejected and blamed and ostracized. And they were all demonized. Lilith was demonized too. She's considered to be the demon because she said no to Adam, because she wanted to be in her own authority. And maybe Medusa did too. Rape or no rape, she ought to be in authority of her own life. So there's a Lilithic element here because the asteroid is right opposite Uranus and Algol. It means that we're going deep into the feminine wounds, into the repressed anger about all of this, the repressed pain of feeling left out, of being demonized for being something else, for wanting what's best for you, for saying no. That's it. Oh my God, that's it. Saying no, to be respected for your boundaries. There's a deep wound. And the feminine is also in the man, okay? So let we not forget that. This is not just about women. The feminine is in every being. We are all masculine and feminine to a certain degree. And also Pallas Athena is right there with Lilith. So they're battling it out. And in a way, it's opposite Algol. So I think we're transforming here because it makes a huge T-square to Mercury and Medusa. We're cleaning out a lot of shit, and we're purging out a lot of pain, and we're feeling a lot of trauma. It's deep in our DNA. It's deep in our psyche. It has to come out. That's why these mythologies are there. It's why these stories are out. We're all here to heal it. We're all here to transmute it and alchemize it into peace, serenity, and ultimately love. So ask yourself, how can you transform and mutate a new reality where there's no more betrayal and hurt and suppression of emotions, and how we can be ourselves more fully? How can we lead more honorable and ethical lives, honoring ourselves, our ancestors? This is what you can ask yourself. But as I said, collectively, a whole lot of shit might go down. So raise your awareness. Think about what the Medusa story tells you, because we're here to transform it. We're here to heal it. And I think we're here to bring a lot of love into it. Because let's not forget again that it was Medusa, that it was Algol, okay? Her spirit, her spiritual self, that made the eternal love between the hero Perseus and Princess Andromeda even possible. The greatest love story in the cosmic history. So how can you be a better lover? How can you bring more love into this? How can you be the transformation for this deep love? How can we live a happily ever after life and happily ever after reality? This is where we are at a very high spiritual awareness place. And everyone else who wants to play out a reality of fear, of violence, of disasters, destruction, they are all doing that because they need to break down before they can break through. And so if you've had a spiritual breakthrough already, it's time to buckle up and move to love. So tell me in the comments what this Algol or Medusa message has given you. What's the conclusion that you can make after hearing all there is to hear about this? after hearing the statistics, as well as the symbolism, as well as the story, as well as the meaning of it, what do you think that is really going on here? And think about the Taurus and Scorpio axis, because that is at play. So I just wish everybody deep healing, and I wish great love into this world. First, love yourself so that we can share and radiate that love into this world. And so we can live happily ever after. May this Algol experience be, transformative alchemization of reality.